So, this video was originally going to be me telling you why the disposable missile launcher was better than the Royal Capacitor. But the original script sucked. Like, the wiki didn't say that Royal Capacitor had a proc coefficient, and I based half the video on that fact. It, in fact, has a proc coefficient of 1. So I needed to change that. I also played with both equipment at the same time using Retool MULT-I. And that run was enlightening, to say the least. So let me tell you why both of these equipment are insane when used together. I think the best way to tell you about how strong these two are is to talk about them separately. So starting with Disposable Missile Launcher, which I will be referring to as DML from now on. The DML is an equipment that shoots 12 rockets that deal 300% damage each, with a proc coefficient of 1, and has a cooldown of 45 seconds. Royal Capacitor is an equipment that hits an enemy with a lightning bolt for 3000% damage and has a proc coefficient of 1, with a 20-second cooldown. Both of these items are really good on their own, but when combined together, they become ridiculously powerful. Royal Capacitor is one strong strike on a single enemy. It has slight AoE, so it might hit a couple, but it's small enough where it's mostly just used for single target damage. DML is the opposite. It is a bunch of rockets that can handle a group of weaker enemies. It may target one enemy, but it's not what you're going to use it for. So with both of these combined, you've got an answer for almost anything. I ended up taking way too long on stage 1 because I didn't have MULT-I's rebar attack when I really needed it. And yet I managed to leave the stage thanks to DML helping me clear the army of enemies after me, and the Royal Capacitor helped me handle the tankier enemies, including the teleporter boss. I should have lost on that stage, and yet I didn't because of how powerful these two are. And they only got better over time thanks to the items. Speaking of, let's talk about what items work with these. Let's start with the items that work well with both equipment. Of course, we have the items that reduce cooldowns, so Fuel Cell, Gesture of the Drowned, Soulbound Catalyst. Because, I mean, come on, lower cooldowns means more equipment uses. Next up is any damage boosting items, except Focus Crystal, because both DML and Royal Capacitor are ranged weapons. Crowbar is absolutely the best item of the bunch, though I'm counting crit differently to the other damage boosting items because of the other items that are affected by crit, so Harvester Scythe, Predatory Instincts, and Shatter Spleen. I'll talk about those more in a moment when I talk about DML. Anyway, all the normal proc chain items are good because they're good normally. Warhorn is also good because it activates on equipment use, and I mean, this video is on equipment, it's basically necessary to mention. And the last step is on kill items. These are basically mandatory because you need AoE damage. I know I said that DML is good for that, but it's not as good as a Gasoline or Will-o-the-Wisp. Anyway, moving on to items that are specifically good on DML, let's start off with Topaz Brooch. You're killing so many enemies that having 3 of these might actually be effective. Now, the crit items I mentioned earlier are better with DML because of the amount of projectiles you'll shoot. With max crit, a Harvester Scythe and every rocket landing will heal you for 96 health, which isn't a ton later into a run, but later on you'll be strong enough where it won't matter. Next up is Berserker's Pauldron and Hunter's Harpoon. I know I mentioned on-kill items earlier, but I meant the directly damaging ones then. These two work good here, because you'll probably be consistently killing enough enemies where these items will be active enough to be good. And of course we have to talk about Pocket ICBM. It triples your rockets, meaning you go from 12 to 36, and after doing a bit of math, having a Pocket ICBM and a Soulbound Catalyst, if every rocket kills, you'll get 3.2 cooldowns back, which is insane, and that's without Gesture of the Drowned and Fuel Cell, meaning that can be higher. And of course that's the best possible situation, but still, when I was recording footage for this video, I almost had constant uptime on my rockets. Alright, now let's talk about Royal Capacitor, which I think I'll be shortening to Capacitor. Anyway, I already mentioned Crowbar earlier, and the other items to talk about are bands. Now, if you don't know what bands do, here's a quick summary for you. Kajara's band summons a fire tornado, and the Runald's band does an icy explosion. As the wiki says, however, it doesn't have an AoE, so it's not really an explosion, it's just kind of a big hit. Now, both bands activate when you hit something for 400% damage, or more, and thankfully, Capacitor deals 3000%, which I think is just barely enough to activate them. Now, funnily enough, both band items kinda act like these two equipments, where one's good for single target damage, and the other is good for group damage. One important thing to note is both bands do total damage, which means it's multiplied by how much damage the attack does. So combining them with Capacitor deals an insane amount of damage. Now there is a third band, which is the Void counterpart to both bands, called Singularity Band. Now personally, I love this item, but I can see its flaws. Compared to the other two bands' 10-second cooldown, the Singularity Band has a 20-second cooldown, which sucks, but the Singularity Band is really strong. It summons what is essentially a black hole that after 5 seconds explodes everything inside it. It's like the Primordial Cube, but stronger. So if you think you'd prefer that over the other two bands, I recommend it. Now, I haven't tested it, but I'd imagine Brilliant Behemoth would be great because it gives Capacitor some much-needed AoE. I don't actually think there's any more items I can talk about for Capacitor. It's very good with the few items that it needs, while DML needs more items but can get stronger than Capacitor due to its requirements. Now here's something new for me to talk about. Let's talk about strategy. Logically, MULT-I is the character to pick to try these two, because MULT-I is literally the only character that can have two equipment. I recommend not being like me, and you should probably grab Rebar and Nailgun. I recommend that you use DML with Rebar and Capacitor with Nailgun. That way you always have a single target and grouped enemy option. If you had to pick an equipment over the other, I don't think I could pick for you. It's very run dependent. If you have no items, I'd say that maybe DML is better for dealing with stuff like wisps and blind pests that may be annoying you in the air. Anyway, I've been Anfaznar, and you're watching Disney Channel. Bye!